Okay, so I'm going to do part three, the last part of my series on Hebrew prayers, and we can kind of accompany our meditation practice and allow us to bring some mindfulness into our day. And in the previous weeks, I talked about um, a morning prayer, forgetting what that's called, Modeh Ani, and I talked about gratitude with that one. And then last week I talked about the Shehechianu prayer and acceptance of where you are now and what season you're in and presence in your life. And then the next one I naturally would have done would be the Shema. But Bob did a whole series on the Shema, so I thought I'd spare you of hearing that again. So I chose a different prayer that I think is really beautiful. There are some beautiful um, melodies you can look up on YouTube or wherever you find music. But it's called Ana B'Koach, and I'll read it for you to start. It says, "If you would, may your mighty right hand undo the knots that tie us up. Accept the prayers of your people who are revered. Raise us up, cleanse us. Almighty, if you would, guard as the apple of your eye those who seek your unity. Bless them, cleanse them, have compassion on them. Always act justly toward them. Mighty Holy One, in your abundant goodness, guide your people. Alone exalted, turn to your people who invoke your holiness. Listen to our pleas, hear our cries, knowing the hidden depths within us. Praised be the name of the one whose glorious sovereignty is forever and ever." So this is often considered a mystical prayer. It is some Kabbalists, I'm not sure if it's the same in our tradition or not, but some Kabbalists say that it's an acrostic of the 42 letter name of God. It has 7 lines, and each line has 6 words. And then it ends with the statement, Baruch Shem Kavod Malkuto Leolam Va'ed, just like the Shema. The Shema is talking about the Yud He Vav He name of God, as opposed to the 42 letter name of God in this one. Um, and I won't be talking too much about that name. I just think it's an interesting feature and brings some gravity to this prayer. Um, but I think it really calls to something special. And I'm used to saying this prayer on Friday nights in a service as a way of going into service. And there are a few other times you can say it. I'm going to read this commentary from the Lev Shalem Siddur, which I think is a beautiful Siddur that has just in the margins poetry and some nice commentary. So it says, the mystics ascribe the authorship of Ana B'Koach to Nehunia ben Hakana, 2nd century, the land of Israel. The prayer has no fixed place in the formal liturgy. Some recite it each morning, some as part of the counting of the Omer. Its 7 sentences, each mentioning a different aspect of God, recommend it as a Friday evening prayer that celebrates God's sovereignty on the 7th day of creation. And so it has this line in it, really the first line, if you would, may your mighty right hand undo the knot that ties us up. So if you think about that, think about, what is the knot? Who has tied us up? I think sometimes you can kind of feel that way physically, like there's a knot in us. And particularly if you celebrate the Shabbat, one thing that it can be really lovely to do is to set aside your worries for the week and come into Shabbat with newness and with hope and with celebration of the day. And then, when you come out of Shabbat again, you can kind of pick up those things that you put down, and you might come to them with a greater ease or a renewed energy. And so I think this idea of untying the knots parallels to a lot of the metaphors we have around blockages of water. One of the most common ones that we talk about in this practice is the idea of well drilling. And when we're meditating, we're drilling this well, and lots of sludge is coming up. But if we keep drilling consistently, eventually what's able to come up is the waters of pure consciousness. And we're able to have this connection with the absolute, with the divine. Another place you encounter this in scripture is, I think, a few places where there's a well and there's a stone covering a well, and one of our characters has to roll the stone away from the well, removing that hard blockage to allow the waters to flow. And if you're familiar with the Zohar, and there are some parts that talk about a similar idea where there are these frozen and congealed waters that are blocking waters of pure consciousness from flowing like a river to, I think, from above to below. So from kind of the divine to the world where we're living. And so all of these blockages and this idea of this knot, they all relate to or are formed by harsh judgment and rigidity. And that's something you've probably heard Bob say a lot, that phrase, harsh judgment and rigidity. And, it's self-explanatory. It's, has to do with the result of our actions and our judgments, and the way that we fail to kind of bend and be open-minded. And so if that's the case, we might wonder, why is this a prayer? Why are we beseeching this mighty right hand to untie the knots? Shouldn't we be responsible for those ourselves? Shouldn't we be untying our own knots? And I think it's important to point out, with what I'm getting to, that every one of us in this call, and it's really just every one of us in general, has a different conception of God. And some people might not believe in a God at all and might relate to the universe in a spiritual way or a non-spiritual way. Some conceptions of God are more kind of anthropomorphized, more of a little bit more of a literal right hand. Some see God as energy flowing through everything. And there are so many ways that we kind of engage with this idea of God. But I would like to say that for this, it doesn't really matter. It can be any of those conceptions of God, because the idea is that we're surrendering. Just as we kind of tied these knots in ourselves, we're surrendering, we're allowing the knots to loosen. And so, in our meditation, I think part of what we're doing is we're causing our ego, the part of us that wants to control everything, to release that control of our narratives. And I believe, as I mentioned last time, we become the observer of our thoughts rather than being the thinker, being fully engaged in every thought and every kind of place our mind is running. We become the observer, we kind of loosen control. And we surrender to what we're experiencing, and we surrender kind of as we dive deeper to that which always is, which is unity. And I think it's through the experience of unity, and also through the following actions that come from unity, that we take for unity, that we cause or allow ourselves to heal, and our, with any negative experiences or any kind of blockages we have, cause to heal. And I think also take part in the healing of the world. And then I also want to note here that it might also be important for us to surrender our conception of what unity looks like. And if we've always been trying to force unity with another person, or kind of in a group or at large, if we're trying to force unity to look a specific way and it's not working, maybe it's time to kind of surrender that idea, take a step back and listen to those around you, and kind of be in a state of acceptance of where that other person is, or where that group of people is. And time can change things, but I think unity is not something we force, it's something that we allow. And so I think that when we untie these knots of our knowing, of our conceptions, then we can kind of come back with a clean slate. We can kind of try again for unity in a renewed way. And so if we kind of remember back to the rest of the prayer, it's talking about undoing the knots, and then there are a lot of verbs like accept our prayers, guard us, bless us, guide us, listen to our pleas. And then this last part really stuck out to me as well. Listen to our pleas, hear our cries, knowing the hidden depths within us. And so if we think back to this idea of harsh judgment and rigidity, I don't think anyone wants to describe themselves that way. I don't think anybody wants to be that way. I don't think anybody, goes about thinking, oh, I want to judge harshly and I want to be rigid. And so if these aren't really things that we are seeking, we can think about, why do they occur anyway? And I think, and I've been thinking about this recently in the last few days as well, that I think a big reason that we get to this place of harsh judgment and rigidity is fear. And, we are in a time where after the election, I think a lot of us have some strong feelings, and I'm sure they go in opposite directions, and, in the middle and all over the place. And I think it's particularly important now with those that have the capacity to love each other, and everybody has the capacity, but I think our meditation helps us to be open to remembering to love each other and accept each other. And so going back to this idea of fear, I think all of us, have some fear that harsh judgment and rigidity can bloom out of. We might have a fear of not being able to pay for groceries because the prices keep going up. We might have a fear of not being able to get the health care that we need, or or a loved one needs. We might have a fear of foreign powers. We might have a fear of not being accepted for who we are. And there are a lot of things to fear, however your kind of politics, wherever your politics puts you. And I think it's important to kind of see those fears for what they are and not allow them to turn into something bigger. And I was thinking at this point of a Star Wars quote that my dad loves. Um, I think it probably comes from Yoda. Yoda's the wise one. And he says, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. And, we might not really think of ourselves as hating anyone. We might be angry. I'm certainly angry sometimes. um, but I think we could replace this idea of hate with harsh judgment and rigidity. And that itself can lead to suffering, both in ourselves and in other people. And I think that each one of us is responsible for ensuring that our fear and our pain and whatever we're experiencing does not cause suffering to anyone else, even when our fear is justified. And I think an important tool, or a helpful tool, for dealing with this fear is speaking about it, and really, I think, being seen. And that's why this end stuck out to me. Listen to our pleas, hear our cries, knowing the hidden depths within us. That those are the hidden depths that might even be hidden to ourselves. We might not understand where our harsh judgment and rigidity comes from. So we need to plumb that depths, but we also need that we need a light shown on that. We need to feel understood. We need to feel loved for all of who we are. And, when we have this idea of a God that understands and loves all of that, or also a friend that can understand and love all of that we can speak to, I think that goes a long way to kind of addressing that fear before it hardens in us. And I think with this, we can then start to act in unity and not act in separation. And so this prayer that I'm speaking of, it speaks to our desire to loosen the tightness that's within us, and in turn to be safe and to be seen. And that's why it's such a beautiful prayer to me, and I invite you to look up some tunes. It's really, there are really some beautiful tunes that are out there. But that's where I'll leave it for today.